Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you had a fun and safe 4th of July weekend. We're back here with the XR250. Going to be doing a little bit of work on the back end of the bike now. There's a couple things that need to get done. A lot of wear and tear, like service items. The sprockets, while they're not like unevenly worn, are pretty worn, and the chain is almost near the end of the adjustment and is super loose. So we're gonna throw on a new set of sprockets, front and rear, a new chain, got a new chain slider, a couple other little things like the little clips here, the stays for the rear brake line, as well as do a couple other little things. But I got a couple parts over here. So you got the chain slider. These are the little stays for the rear brake cable. Could only find them through Honda. Steel sprocket set and a new 520 chain. So let's get into it. So first things first, we're gonna start off by taking the rear wheel off. One of the most important things to kind of make this go smoothly is to get this rear sprocket off without damaging these bolts. So they're pretty easy to strip. I find that the easiest way to do it is actually with the wheel on the bike. What I'm gonna go ahead and do is actually kind of put it in position where I can at least get to half of the bolts, put it in gear, and that'll stop the wheel from moving. It's a 5mm for the Allen head and a 14mm for the backside, combined with the wheel being locked from being in gear, should be enough to break them all loose. I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. Put it in gear. Pop it into neutral so we can get the other side. Alright, there we go. So we've loosened up all of these bolts. So the next thing we got to do is take the chain off. Just need a set of pliers to do this. There's going to be one end that's open and one end that's completely closed. Usually the end that's open is at the back. So the wheel travels forward. The back end is usually, the open end is usually at the back end. So you can kind of see how it opens up there. And then there's a plate on the front. The link comes out of the back. Put the bike in neutral, and then you can just pull the chain right out. And set this aside. I did buy a universal chain, so we need to match up the amount of links. That way we put the appropriate size chain back on. Next up is going to be getting the rear axle out so we can slide the wheel out. Going to be a 24mm for the nut on the right hand side and a 17 for the axle on the other side. Go ahead and hold the axle on the other side with your 17mm. And it is going to be pretty tight, so you want a big wrench. There we go. Going to be a washer, the adjuster. Usually these are a little bit tight, so you can just thread the nut on there a couple turns so that it's flush, and give the axle a couple light taps just to get it started. As you're pulling the axle out of the other side, you want to make sure to just hold on to the wheel. This whole brake assembly needs to be slid off of the disc. You want to just kind of slide it forward, because at least on this bike it does have this protector for the brake disc. There is a slot here on the swing arm. You can just go ahead and slot that back in to hold it up and out of the way. That's the wheel out of the bike. We're gonna go ahead and remove the sprocket off the wheel, and then we can move to the front. It is important to note that, like the front wheel in the previous video, there is a spacer here on the drive side. Want to make sure you hold on to that and don't lose it. Now we'll go ahead and take the sprocket off. With all the bolts off, should just slip right off. It is important to take a look at the sprockets just to make sure that they are the same. Also important to note the orientation. It's a little hard to see on camera, but there's a little step there. You can kind of see it on here. So this side is going to go towards the wheel. It's great. I'm going to go ahead and install all the bolts. I'm not going to actually torque them down just yet. I'm just going to go ahead and snug them up because there's a couple other things I want to take care of before we put the rear wheel back on. Okay, so moving on to the back sprocket here. The cover itself is just 2 bolts, one there and one there. And there is a support bracket in here that goes in there just like that. I did not film it because it was a little bit difficult for me to get it off. But my bike did actually not have the little plate with the 2 bolts here to secure it. These do have a little groove there, so it just has a C-clip. Which I've seen on a lot of bikes. The C-clip pliers that I have were not large enough. I ended up having to very carefully use pliers, but I did manage to get it off. Once your clip is off or that plate is off with the 2 bolts, this should just slide off. This is the old sprocket. One thing that's important to note is that this one, like the other, has a step on one side, so there is a offset to it. You want to put it back the same way you took it off. The step on this one was facing out away from the motor. So this is the stock gearing, which is 13 tooth, and this is an aftermarket sprocket because this is 12 teeth. Nevertheless, I'm going to put the stock gearing back on here. Put the new sprocket on and reinstall the C-clip. So here is the new sprocket with the C-clip installed. I'm going to go ahead and actually look into getting the plate for this sprocket, the plate and the 2 bolts, because I did look at a parts diagram. It shows that that's the way that these originally came. I don't think this will be an issue because sprocket is actually pretty secure. It's essentially just kind of holding it in place and alignment with the rear sprocket. Next up, we're going to be looking at chain slider. It should just be 2 Phillips head bolts, top and bottom. Want to just make sure you hold on to this little retaining plate here and the bolt. And that's all that's left of the original chain slider. I'm gonna grab a rag with a little bit of parts cleaner and clean the top and bottom side of this swing arm here. That way the new chain slider sits flush. This is the new chain slider. It is a little bit tougher rubber than most I've encountered. I did get this piece off of Amazon, but it was roughly 1/3 of the cost. If it lasts a couple years, then I'd say it's probably worth the investment. We'll go ahead and try to snake this through the frame here and see how it lines up. The chain actually runs along this groove here. This is to center it. Should have known because this flat side is a lot flatter than the other. That's what would go up against the swing arm here. Go ahead and put these little bolts and the retainer plates in. You want to put on the second one before you tighten these down because they are slotted. You can actually move these forwards and backwards, pull them both back so that the chain slider is nice and taut on the swing arm. I am noticing that the bottom hangs just a little bit, but again, it's a part that's less than a third of the price of the OEM one, so I'm just gonna leave it on there and see if it lasts. We're gonna be replacing these little plastic clips on the brake cable, or brake line, I'm sorry. They are pretty brittle, as you can see, but it should be pretty simple to change out. It's just two little Phillips heads. We got the nice new one from Honda here. These are gonna be like the chain slider on the other side. They're very, very low torque. Just snug them up. Next thing I want to do before cutting the chain and putting on the chain, tensioning the wheel and all that, is going to be greasing all of these nipples on the suspension. A little more difficult to get at those once you actually have the back wheel on, and basically you just connect it to the nipple here, just clips on, and you pump it full of grease until grease starts coming out of the sides there. Keeps your bearings lubricated, swing arm going up and down smoothly, and gets rid of squeaks. Got done greasing the whole linkage here. This is what a grease gun looks like. I've just got a simple cheap one. I think it was under 20 bucks. This end here snaps onto one of those nipples there. You'll feel it engage once you push it on, and you basically just want to see the grease kind of start to come out on both sides, and then you can disconnect it. Just try to wipe off the excess. So just a tip when actually cutting your own chain, measure up the new chain based on the amount of links, not the actual length. So if I actually went off the length of this chain, it would be incorrect. So actually, from starting from this link down to the other end, I counted the same amount of links. But if you look at it, if you actually stretch both chains side by side, the old chain is actually probably an inch longer than the new one. That would give you too long of a chain. Here is the new chain cut to size. I think the easiest probably is to just get one of these. It's a chain breaker tool. You want to just make sure to get one that's big enough for the size of chain that you're working on. I think I got this for probably under $15, and it's lasted me quite a long time. Save for just demonstration purposes, this is the length of chain that you need from this pin to this pin. So essentially you would need to take out this pin in order to join it to the other side. Just for the demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and mark this one. That's the pin that we need to leave. So essentially this hole needs to be removed from here. You actually are going to need to push two pins out. These teeth here need to go like so. Pin on the chain breaker is lined up with the pin on the chain, and you just crank it. You're going to need to go over to the next one out and push it through that outer plate as well. So this is what it'll look like. So you essentially wanted to push those two pins out of here, and then at that point this will just slide out and you have your chain made up, and you just need to insert your master link there. Before we put the back wheel back on, there's a couple surfaces you want to clean, starting with the axle, the spacer that's going to go on the drive side, as well as the surface in which the spacer rides in, the channel which the axle rides in, as well as the stay for the brake. You want to clean all of that out, and you might say why. It already has a bunch of grease on it, and the reason is that grease actually will have dirt and grime stick to it. Eventually, if you don't lubricate it enough, you're going to end up having the axle be stuck, or it starts to wear down the axle. You can see it has a little bit on here. In some cases, it can actually cause some play. On reassembly, you want to actually lubricate the axle, as well as put a little bit of grease on the inside lip of this oil seal here, and slide everything together. Took a little bit of doing, but I got the wheel back on there just to show you guys everything that goes back together. Yeah, so it's the axle. You've got an adjuster on the outside of the swing arm. You got a spacer between the swing arm and the hub. Another on this side, and then you've got a adjuster and then a spacer and the nut. Make sure that you have the numbers on the adjusters facing out in order for them to be in the correct orientation. Having the chain already on, I went ahead and torqued down the nuts for the sprocket. Those go down to 24 foot-pounds. Nut on the axle gets torqued down to 65 foot-pounds. My camera died, so I apologize. Didn't get that on video, but pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially just putting it back together in the reverse order that you took it apart. I actually also ended up finding a spring for the kickstand. It is a little bit tighter, doesn't wobble anymore, so that's a plus. I'm gonna go ahead and end the video here. There's a couple other things that I want to take care of, but we're getting pretty close to being able to take this thing for a ride. If you like this video about the XR250, feel free to check out the other ones that I have on my channel. There should be a couple more coming soon, as well as some other projects that I've got in the works. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.